Okay, thank you. Thanks for folks for coming in and joining in this live stream, Deceleration live stream, built kind of on the back of this series. His name is Albert. It's a three-part series about an unhoused man, a neighbor of ours, someone who caught our attention, who a year ago lost both of his feet, part of one leg, and I think both feet. And what it took then to get him into housing. It's still not a permanent situation. I understand we're going to have a dialogue here with my partner here, Marisol Cortez, co-editor at Deceleration, Rachel Tucker, who's one of the directors of constituent services on D5 on the west side with the Office of Councilmember Teri Castillo, and our friend Maria Turvin of Yanawana Herbolarios. She is the operations director and founder, and all of these tremendous advocates, tremendous, a lot of heart, and I'm looking forward to this dialogue. I wanted to kind of open quickly, kind of a couple updates. First, one has to do with. Oh wait, I could have shot these mug shots up. Sorry, I left that off. But here's Rachel, Marisol, Maria. We're going to be visiting here momentarily, and I'm going to be able to switch my attention over to the comments and to feed questions in if folks are showing up and want to engage in that way. And if you are joining, we are live streaming on the Deceleration channels on YouTube, on Facebook, and I believe on Twitter and LinkedIn, I think. So if you're there and you leave comments, hopefully they're getting fed over here. If they're not, try another channel. I'll do my best to, but wave your hand, let me know you're here. So the other thing that this week had caught our attention at Deceleration was a proposal that turned out to be very an extension of some efforts on the city's part to dislodge and evict migratory birds. This goes back many years, but I think 2019 on the west side of San Antonio, again at Elmendorf Lake, what had been known and is known as Bird Island still was the largest and maybe the longest lived rookery in the city. And the Parks Department, with the assistance of state and federal regulators, went and destroyed the rookery to get rid of the birds. There were a lot of the justifications, the language is being used by the former council member on that. We had a problem with the logic there, and a lot of other residents did as well. That effort, the attack, the war on the birds at Bird Island, led to other city harassments where they're using lasers and pyrotechnics and all kinds of devices, chemical sprays. It's in Brackenridge, in Woodlawn, and in Elmendorf. And so this case over in Brackenridge Park, here's some of the trees that are coming down. Over 100 trees are scheduled to be taken down, killed, ostensibly in a bond in answer to the 2017 bond, which promised to restore these or protect these historic landmarks and buildings there at Brackenridge. But what caught our attention this week was the director of Parks and Wildlife, Bill Pinnell, when he came to the Planning Commission to make his opening comments. He wasn't talking about buildings. So I want to roll this really quickly.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Bill Pinnell. I'm with the Parks and Recreation Department of the City of San Antonio. We have worked with numerous agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Department of Agriculture, in coming up with this plan to deal with the birds that are affecting Brackenridge Park. So the egrets that roost in the park come in as, some species as early as February and don't leave till November. We have thousands and thousands of birds that nest and roost above public amenities that we like to use. We like the river, the picnic pads, the Joski Pavilion. The playground had to be shut down. Pathways to the restrooms you're not able to get to them without walking through bird feces or other other issues that occur with that. There are diseases also known with bird feces, so there are health and safety concerns that come along with that as well.
I'm sorry, can the audience please respect the speaker at this time? Thank you.
And then along with that, with the coordination with these other agencies, which are our regulatory agencies, this plan was based on another project that was very successful, based on Elmendorf and Woodlawn Lake Parks. And that was because of the runway at Kelly Air Force Base and the impact, the risk factors that belong to that. And those agencies came together with us to work on these plans and to humanely relocate the birds without harming or hurting or killing any birds. Our intent is just to allow them to find another location that is acceptable to us and to them and is better for them. And so, like I said, a lot of work has been done to make sure we're doing the right thing and do it the right way.
And then I just want to, having trouble getting the comments onto the screen, but Molly here is saying that the city staff are now saying that council doesn't need to approve this. So tomorrow there is, and I'm going to flash the number up on the screen, historic design review committee will be hearing this proposal. Because it's about historic structures, unless you're Bill Pinnell in the Parks Department, who thankfully gave us a totally other vision of what they're trying to do at Brackenridge, which is tear down these trees so the birds can't land when they get here in a few weeks. Here's Alicia Garlock, who's a local birder, a photographer, and a tireless advocate on behalf of the trees and the birds and our parks all around the city.
Chasing away birds that come from as far away as South America, who have as much right to be here as we do, is wrong, and all without our knowledge or inclusion in these decisions that will impact not only our wildlife but the public as a whole, because we are all in this tree of life together, and unless we start protecting our trees, our wildlife, our planet, we will have nothing 30 years from now. We are in the midst of a sixth mass extinction of our biodiversity, driven by the actions of us, humans. We are destroying Earth, and we need to stop and say, preserve our trees. San Antonio's 2010 tree ordinance is supposed to be 100% preservation of heritage oak trees. Who the hell would approve giving a permission to destroy those trees? They have given us their life. They have filtered carbon. They have given us oxygen. They have been here through storms. They minimize soil erosion. They beautiful cultural connection to the indigenous people. They're the spirit waters, the spirit trees, the grandfather trees, of the sacred river. And it's going to be gone in the blink of an eye if this goes through. So San Antonio, put your voice up, say no, show up at the park, call your city council people, call whoever, and say stop the destruction of heritage oak trees or any tree in our city parks and the harassment of wildlife, because it's all going to come back and bite us in the ass. Sorry, I have to say that.
And this is just another reason why I love working in community in this way. I clearly, so much of this is advancing quickly with very little oversight, very little understanding on the behalf of the public. I should say that clip with Alicia there, that was at Joski's Pavilion, where the Parks Department was supposed to be holding at that moment, Friday, a briefing for the community so that we could understand what this proposal is, why they need 104 trees to come down in the heart of Brackenridge, what this is really about, what's driving it. A lot of skepticism, a lot of questions being asked. If you check out our story at deceleration.news, I believe that's also now, this is a Creative Commons site, so other media free to pick it up. I believe Nowcast SA has it up on their site as well. So check that. But this comment from Molly that this maybe doesn't even need to go now to specifically for council approval for the Parks Department to take out all these trees for questionable purposes. I will say at the Planning Commission, one of the members who ultimately voted in favor of what Public Works was asking, that they they asked kind of what's the hurry? Can you just pause and just kind of talk to people about this? And the response was, well, the birds are coming, right? And once the birds get here, then they can't take the trees down. But that scheduled meeting on Friday to inform the community of what this is about was canceled 30 minutes ahead of that meeting, 12:30. It was a 1 p.m. meeting, and there was no parks, nobody there for us. And so at this point, it's kind of we're looking to Historic Design and Review. They meet tomorrow, I think, at 3:00. If folks call in before noon, that a recording of your message will be played in the meeting and go into the minutes for whatever that's worth. We saw at Planning Commission, a lot of you called in with real concerns about what was happening, and they moved right through you. And one of the justifications given by the members was that, well, we talked about this in 2017 when this went into the bond, and I just don't think that's the case. And so I'm going to transition here. I want to mention one other thing. I was trying to get ready for this broadcast. I talked with the director at the Butterfly Center down in the valley. Some of you guys, some folks have been following the story. Where a MAGA candidate out of Virginia came down there and attacked the director. There was scuffles over phones and videos, and they were accusing her of being complicit or a part of human trafficking or some kind of bizarre, stuff that, it's like Comet Ping Pong going on here in South Texas. And they closed over the weekend there's some MAGA rally down there with a concern for their safety, and it came from a place that sounded very legitimate. They've definitely been targeted on social media and with all these accusations of being part of this conspiracy, right, of moving bodies, burying bodies, hiding bodies. And there was a meeting of their board today over potentially closing indefinitely, which would be a huge loss. But I will be putting up on Deceleration probably a podcast or some kind of audio dispatch of that conversation, because the one thing that she shared, Mariana down there at the Butterfly Center shared with me, was that apparently in this movement towards the midterms, that the valley, the border wall, trafficking, that all of this is being cast as like the litmus test for candidates all around the country. So she's expecting, and they are expecting, more folks to be coming down, targeting them, targeting others. So I just encourage folks to be careful, be aware, and we'll try to bring as much light into that situation as possible. I do want to just direct us back again now. His name is Albert. This was I learned a lot. My partner Marisol took this on, and originally not for Deceleration. This wasn't a media project, but this was an intervention. This is just, a neighbor seeing a neighbor in distress and trying to find help. And some of those who came to her aid and the aid of Albert are here with us tonight. Again, Rachel Tucker from D5 Constituent Services. Madi and I have talked about this and everything that happened. Cannot imagine. It's easy to imagine that Albert would not be alive were it not for the election that brought in our council member and people like yourself to engage with us. It's easy to imagine that as well without people like Maria and Yanawana Herbolarios and all the work that they're doing here. So I'm going to open up this part. This is why we're here, to have this dialogue and have a conversation and really to talk about what lessons were learned in this process, how Albert is right now, but also what gaps were discovered that had to be navigated, and how we can learn from this to encourage movement going forward. So let me turn on some mics. Welcome our guests. Let's see. Okay, I think you can unmute yourselves. Marisol, Maria, and who else? Oh, I'm muting you. I'm sorry, Rachel. Let me try to get this. Okay, now we're good. This is like too much tech for me. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I just want to maybe just real quickly. I did introductions. So hopefully you caught some of the broadcast already, so folks kind of know who you are. I wonder if we could start to my left, Maria. If you would just introduce yourself a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and we'll just pass it around, and we'll just pass the mic a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm Maria, Maria Cristina Turvin with Yanawana Herbolarios. I'm the founder and the operations director. And we pretty much focus on creating sovereignty for our communities. So we do that through ancestral education, which includes all kinds of things from botanical medicine and skills like fire building and emergency structure building and food foraging, that kind of thing. We have a lot of different programming. We have, Medicaler program, the People's Clinic, and our Feria de Resistencia. But in regards to this particular story, we have something that's just simply called the Street Clinic. And the Street Clinic came about during the protests and during the pandemic when our regular clinic, the People's Clinic, had been temporarily shut down because we were operating that time out of partners. We didn't have headquarters at the time, and so during that time we used to see the houseless community at our partner locations. And so when the pandemic happened, we were able to continue serving our housed community, via teleclinic. But we realized, we were leaving our houseless community out. So we just, went directly to the street, and absolutely fell in love with it. Actually, I mean, it was completely transformative and eye opening, and really a lot of things that like I didn't realize that I still had, unconscious biases towards, or that kind of thing. I was like, whoa, like let's address and do some woodshedding of, give taking care of some of these things, like, that apparently I didn't realize that I still needed to address. So it's my favorite program, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're so suited to it, and just having seen you out there a little bit, not as much as Marisol, but just reading along with this process, I'm really, really impressed by yourself, by your work, and really grateful for it. Rachel, do you want to kind of step in and kind of introduce yourself to folks who may not know you, and how you got engaged in this particular intervention?
Sure. So yeah, my name is Rachel Tucker, and I'm one of the directors of constituent services under Councilwoman Teri Castillo's office. I mean, I basically have been in the community, like struggling alongside the community for about a decade now, and I'm really privileged to be in the position that I am in today. Basically, with the work that I do in the office is being in contact with constituents in our district and linking them with resources, whatever that may be. It spans with all the different needs that people have, right? And questions. Really, our office is really trying to bring in people into the political process, to the democratic process, because it's very important, right? And so we're constantly telling folks to go and call us, get involved, comment, right? It's very important. And that is how we got involved, because there was a strong community with Marisol, with outreach worker Dan Grovin, Nikita, our outreach worker with DHS as well. And honestly, and Maria Turvin, right? They called and said, like, there is a big need, there is a big help, somebody needs a lot of help here. And that's when we started to get involved in the process, because there was a lot of roadblocks, right? And being new to world, right? It was a big learning curve for us as well. My coworker Taylor and our whole office has had a hand in helping Albert get what he needs. But definitely, it wouldn't have happened without community reaching out and us struggling together.
Excellent.
So
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. I will say there's a comment that you can't see, I think, but it says Rachel Tucker runs city. True or false? Runs city council in charge of the mayor and city manager.
If that's Molly, no, no,
Okay.
absolutely false.
All right. We're working on it. Hey, Mari, why don't you step in?
Hey, Greg. Well, I'm Marisol. For those who don't know me, I'm Marisol Cortez, and I primarily understand myself now as a writer, but have done a lot of other stuff. I've worked a long time in the community as an organizer, as an activist around. More recently, like in the last 10 years, a lot around like displacement. And so, by virtue of displacement around housing justice, but I think of it, but my longer history is around environmental justice. And so even the housing work and the like displacement work I thought of in terms of like land struggles, the struggles, people's right to remain, people's right to have relationship to land, um, um, and but yeah, but more recently I kind of have come to feel like that my unique contribution to make to that work and just to being on the planet is to write. um I didn't, like you were saying, Greg, like I didn't get involved in the situation as a writer at first. It was a situation in our neighborhood, right? So I got involved as a neighbor. I would see Albert. Well, I saw before Albert became disabled by the storm. I would see Albert. We saw Albert. He reminded me recently, like that he used to hang out like on Laredo Street before he came a little south, like to our block. So I would see him there, and for years, a couple years at least, 2 3 years, and then after the storm, a few months after the storm, I saw him again in the neighborhood, and I didn't recognize him because of how much how badly the storm and the amputations had affected his health, and it was shocking to me. And I mean, we live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of houselessness, um, and but it was so it's not like we're not seeing folks on the streets every day, but it was shocking to me, like the health, the situation of his health, um, um, that a man, um, I just couldn't believe that somebody was on the streets, like had been released from the hospital just to the streets in his condition, um, and that was a few months after the storm. And so yeah, I knew somebody at Yanawana Herbolarios, and I had worked with them a little bit before, like during the storm, to try to locate resources for our friend Ralph, um,
Yeah,
who
I forgot about that already.
yeah, yeah. So I had worked with them, and so I reached out to them again, and I knew Monica, one of their medics. And so, it's like in that kind of situation, like if there wasn't an organization like Yanawana Herbolarios, like who would I call? There's like EMS, you could call EMS, but he didn't, when I talked to him that day, he didn't want me to call
Yeah.
EMS, right? There's the cops, right? There's the ambulance, or there's the cops, and there's nobody else, right? But I knew that Yanawana Herbolarios would, like, I knew that they wouldn't, like they would step in, and they would be persistent, like they would keep coming back until he got the help that he needed. And so that's kind of the origin of how I got
Yeah.
involved. We worked together for And then from there, they recommended somebody within DHS that they thought was really, really helpful, and he was a tremendous help.
Mm-hmm.
Um, primarily because he wasn't afraid to work with us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he wasn't afraid to collaborate with folks that were working on the outside of the system as
Mm-hmm.
activists. Um,
Let me
and
step
so,
in for
like,
just a minute, just to
sure.
move to keep this moving. I want to
Yeah.
support that, you like your observation of this as a climate story, right? It's not written in a way. It's like all the data, parts per million in the atmosphere, and all this and other stuff. But by tracking this, I think two things. One is like, yeah, we watched this man unravel on the street in front of everybody. It's like he was melting on the sidewalk through the freeze that took his feet and his legs, through the heat strokes. He was falling on the cement, from into a wheelchair and then into the mud. I mean, just like constant, like, and it just never seemed to go anywhere. And so, when I really appreciate the comment about where would you go, there's the cops or the ambulance, right? And then there's the undertaker. But there's also these other things happening, right? There's Yanawana, right? And then there's our council office engaging, and new blood and with city programs. But it is. I totally agree with that. It is kind of like watching this. You understand it as a climate story. You understand that we can't allow, if an office of sustainability to talk about tightening up our buildings for climate reasons, but not be addressing this, not be addressing like the people who are out there today on the street already, and what it means with accelerating climate shocks. This is all premeditated, right? Like what we're putting our families through and our relatives. Not to Maria, for if you check our interview, a good lesson for all of us to think about when we're on the street, who we're meeting on the street. They're not strangers, our relatives. So, but thank you for that. I'm sorry to step in, because I just want to get it move the conversation around a little bit, where like how maybe we should get into a little bit of narrative. I know we want to go to lessons learned, and like what how D5 and the office staff there have kind of come to understand what were these gaps that need to be addressed moving forward. But I wonder, Maria, you're also talking about coming in some ways as fresh eyes into a lot of this through your work, and how that this experience with Albert kind of was part of that education.
Oh yeah, what with with what's available and not available resources, wise, for our most vulnerable houseless uh, community, members. I think that there's probably the assumption, that that surely for the most vulnerable that these resources exist, but truthfully, they don't. To have those resources exist takes a lot more resources, a lot more a lot more planning, a lot more everything. It's not impossible. It's quite possible. Happening in other places, but it was just the mountains that had to be moved to help one individual. And Albert was my was Yanawana Herbolarios' second client that we had to move metaphorical mountains for to help, so to speak, which was useful. That particular case was useful in a trying to help Halbert with this. But the injuries weren't same, the disabilities weren't same, the drug misuse that was going on wasn't the same. So there were differences that presented different challenges, for sure, but with the end result still being that all of these challenges were happening because the resources that we need to help the most vulnerable houseless population, which is the elderly, disabled, that happens to be misusing drugs, that they just simply don't exist. Well, okay, so it's not that they don't exist. It's just that you have to go through a lot of red tape, and you have to go through a lot of red tape, a lot of meetings, a lot of emails, a lot of work to make that happen. And meanwhile, you still have a person that is either on the street or that you're kind of, you know, um, trying to convince the hospital to hold for you. So yeah, it's challenging, you know.
I will say I thought it was interesting, and I know Marisol, you caught this in your story, but it was interesting that when the city convened their committee to look at the winter storm and to look at like what kind of like what we're doing here, kind of unpack it a little bit. What did we learn? What went wrong? What went better than it could have otherwise. And one of the things that I saw was a recognition of community organizations and neighborhood groups stepping into this gap where the need was, because the institutional partners and governmental partners weren't there. That sounds familiar?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, the city, even the city knows that, yeah, it was the community that I saw it most visibly on display in the situation around the Fair Avenue apartments, the situation that happened there, which is a Saha public housing unit on the southeast side. And so these were senior, elder residents, tenants, and people with disabilities, renters who basically, it wasn't Saha stepping in. It wasn't to check on people, to give them food, to give them water, to give them heat, to take them to safety. It was people on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
It was the
Mm-hmm.
community.
And what about let me bring Rachel in on that point, because I know you probably saw things from a vantage point that whoops, wrong clip. That not many people could, right? And so when we talk about institutional failures, kind of, did you see, what were your observations?
Well, we weren't. Councilwoman Teri wasn't in office yet. That
Oh, true,
was
true. Okay, we're going back a year.
the
Yeah.
previous D5. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but I echo,
Mm-hmm.
like personally echo, um, the amount of need that was around. I mean, even in our own neighborhood, like it was neighbors that gave each other water,
Mm-hmm.
because in our neighborhood we didn't have water, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Who? Let me just invite anybody to kind of step in and lead us around at this point, Madi.
Well, I'd like to just think, since we're on the topic of climate, kind of like, one of the things that I really saw or took away from the situation that we went through with Albert was the lack of data. The problem, like even trying to figure out like how is climate change, like you can put it in your plan, like we want to center the needs of the most vulnerable, or we want to center the needs of the houseless, like in addressing climate change in San Antonio, but like there's not there's not a baseline level of data collection or consistent, it seems to me, like data collection on how increasing, like in general, so that then to try to figure out the impact of like increasing extreme weather, increasing cold, increasing heat, how that is affecting how it's affecting mortality, but even beyond mortality, like how is it affecting people, right? Like that data collection isn't happening. And my understanding, I could be wrong, but my understanding from like doing the research for the story is that it's hard to even collect, like I don't know that when houseless folks die that the cause of death is recorded, right? So yeah, unless you have that, how are you even gonna begin to understand the impacts of climate change? Like Maria and I were just talking the other day when we went to go see Albert, or we didn't realize until we met with Albert yesterday, or so yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday.
Where is he now? Yeah.
Yeah.
He's in a small assisted living apartment.
Huge.
Yeah, it's real nice. but and we had heard this. I had heard the story from him already, but but when we heard it yesterday, when he told it again, he added a detail that hadn't been there last time, which was during the storm, a friend of his also had limbs amputated and died.
Yeah.
So we had heard the story that his friend had limbs amputated and died, and so then when he went through that, he was frightened.
Mm-hmm.
But we hadn't heard the detail that it was in the same storm. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, officially, nobody houseless died in San Antonio
Mm-hmm.
during Winter
Right.
Storm Uri, unlike Dallas or unlike Houston, right? San Antonio didn't, but we don't even know
Yeah.
because nobody's looking. Nobody's looking for that data.
Mm-hmm. I'll make a note that so Molly has put in a comment here about kind of like how maybe unremarkable Albert's story is when you get down to the street and you start looking and experiencing houselessness and displacement in a deep way. And I'm wondering for anyone really kind of what made it remarkable and what made it very familiar. I know we interviewed as part of your story. I did a little backup for you with some video interviews, and I interviewed someone with the city's outreach program, and he talked about the resistance to wanting to come in for help, right, to go anywhere, and that comes from somewhere too. So there's like some of these hardships are they're not shocking, they're not new, but we just haven't learned how to respond to them, it seems like. What are your thoughts on that, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a stab. I mean, like one of the big things that came to light to us is the lack of low barrier
Yeah.
shelters, right? Especially for somebody with such need like Albert, which I know he's not the only one out there, right? And so it it as far as I understood, like the outreach program is new, like 11 months old or something like that, which is a big improvement, I think, in it, because we didn't, as far as I know, we didn't have that before, but in the tracking, right, in the future, in the tracking of our houseless constituents and relatives, but yes, I mean that was one of the biggest things that was that we saw was that lack of low barrier housing and lack of having like hubs of those low barrier housings with detox centers as well, and the having the medical need and need of assistance for the for people like this, such as bathing, eating, clothing themselves and everything like that. That was one of the reasons, as y'all wrote in your article, why Sam Ministries unfortunately wasn't able to help Albert, right? And so I think like looking at shifting the narrative, right? Like as like anybody really could be houseless, and giving the social circumstances, bringing humanity into it, and then also like as a city also like look taking into account these gaps that have been identified, right? And working to fix them. And so go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, no, because that right there, right, the identifying the gaps, and here's the thing that I'm like about is that um, multiple organizations, of course, have worked um, with Albert, and these gaps were seen, by multiple organizations, whether it was the hospital or or us or APS or SAMS or whatever like that. Um, and it just seems to me that like there's a certain type of client that is very easy to get sheltered, very easy to get into housing, um, and like Molly said, on the street, it's like, well, Albert's a common thing. Well, and quite frankly, within those of us that are all doing this work, like, we understand, like, yes, this is a common thing that's not being, um, served. So what does it take for everybody to just say, whether it's at the hospital, say, hey, we have this, this houseless guy here that's, has a double amputee. Let me establish a relationship with DHS, or reach out to Sarah Alliance and find out, like, who do I reach out to, or if it's one of the organizations that's like, hey, we turns out we can't help this person, and they'll die on the street possibly. So what can we do real fast to create a support system for them so that doesn't happen? It's there has to be there has to start being a community village type of mentality, even within um organizations. There has to be that willing to, like, to not wait for an invitation to work cooperatively, with people. We all see what the cracks are and what the issues are, and I really feel like at this point, especially if our jobs are supposed to be helping the houseless, that we're being negligent if we're not like, hey, say, we know this is a regular issue that we're seeing. Like, let's try and help be part of this solution. I mean, it's when you keep the way the system is generally set up. It's the same things being done, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So that I really I think that's a big problem, a big gap. There needs to be that cooperative efforts, whether it's like with case managers in hospitals, of like, they know who's houseless when they get in. Then they have a client who dies, like, hey, report it to DHS. If you have a client you have to release out in the street, hey, reach out to myself, or reach out to Dr. Hans's team, or reach out to like, there's you reach out. And if you're an organization that is a shelter, and you get somebody you cannot accept, don't just release them out to the street. Reach out, and say, okay, guys, we have one. We have to figure out collectively how we're gonna help. And then we do that enough, it's like, well, maybe we should just go ahead and create the solution to this, so that we have to stop, finagling and bandaging, each little individual case, because that's also just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question kind of following up from that, like, for all of us. Um, Maybe it's a two-part question. One, like, what was your biggest takeaway from everything that we all went through? Um, and then two, like, coming out of that biggest takeaway, what is needed that the community can then organize to fight for? Like, the there's the direct services work that we all did, and then there was the writing and the documentation and the media work that happened with the story. And then now it's the organizing work. Now it's the community, now it's in the community's hands to take the information and to take the knowledge that was gained from the situation, and to say, this and this and this are what we need, and strategically we're going to call for this and that and this. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious to know from both of you, like, what you see as the big takeaways, and then what are the needs, the most urgent needs that community can push for now.
Let me let me if I can interject on that. Both of those things, but also I wonder, because Dan is not here, and he was the one when I was interviewing him that was saying, "Oh yeah, all these things we weren't really prepared for, but we've been talking. All these agencies are now talking to each other about cases like Albert's, and here's what we're doing." Are there things that are actually different now? And maybe like and start there, and then maybe we can look at the question of takeaways, or is that, do you feel like it's maybe very
Yeah.
similar? Yeah, please take it.
Yeah. I don't know if there's things that are different. Like, maybe there it felt different, and then maybe now there's been a retrenchment. But what felt different to me, and like, because I think it answers both questions, because this is my big takeaway, was how effective it was to have people working together,
Sure.
across institutional locations, like people within the city willing to work with activists, activists working with, city council office, with people, the folks at the hospital, different social service agencies. Like, there was, the last time I was really deeply involved in sort of like, an immediate sort of human rights like crisis in San Antonio was Mission Trails, and there was an incredible failure, um, where like there was you just like there was like it would have been to assist the people at Mission Trails. The city could have partnered with the folks that were on the ground trying to support the residents that were organizing, right? But there wasn't. There was this complete, um, refusal to work with the folks that were most intimate and most, like, it could have been very effective and very powerful, and it wasn't at that moment. And then in this case, like, yeah, like it was incredible, to me, to see what happened when the city was willing to like partner with activists, and when activists, folks with histories of activism and histories of organizing, like, were in public office, and when the right folks were in, public agencies as outreach workers, right? It made an incredible difference, and that's the takeaway for me. Like, please, let's keep doing that.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I completely agree. It's well, to answer the first question, right? Are things different now? And I honestly think, um, like, Albert was a case study, right? With what Marisol was saying, with the city working with community, with activists that have done this for many years, um, and both pushing at the same time. Like, it is basically a case study of how to help one person, right? And like y'all wrote in the Marisol wrote in the article, like 28 people, it took 28 people to help out one person, and that's completely inefficient, right? And so one of the big other changes, that we have seen, is that DHS is working on doing an assessment to find a skilled facility to partner with that can provide this level of care for those unhoused individuals who need it, right? And so that doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Because it comes through pressure, through struggle, right? And then, like Marisol was saying, like, having receptive people that understand the work that activists do, and why it's done, right? Because we want our communities to be better, and we want this to work for people, right? For regular people, for working class folk. And so, one of my biggest takeaways is the need for harm reduction. And I know that Yanawana has had a lot of experience with this. We need to be able to expand needle exchange locations. We need to be able to, because
Honestly,
Yanawana has had a lot. Oh, and we had a conversation with Lisa Cleveland from the UT Health Science Center, which basically said, and I believe Maria says this as well, that harm reduction is public health, right? And so the more um,
yes.
that we're able to mitigate, prevent instead of mitigate, right? So prevent the spread of diseases such as HIV, hepatitis C, and MRSA or MRSA,
Yep.
like the better, right? And then have it accessible to folks. And additionally, one of the other biggest takeaways is, how important it is to have outreach workers like Daniel, Groven, and Nikita, people that demonstrated great empathy and expertise
Yes.
in their in with our most vulnerable, and they were able to build that relationship and trust, to follow through with that care and compassion. They did what's not they didn't do what was easy and say that's just the way things are, right? Like they
Exactly.
made sure to pressure and find avenues and call us, and we definitely struggled together in finding out yet that the city, the county, and DHS have to all work together, and in the future hopefully have a more holistic way, of handling um cases like Albert's.
Hmm. Yes.
Maria, what about you?
So, well, in the regards to, like, relationships, are they better, that kind of thing. Um, uh, I know that, from a citizen perspective, that, it would be easy to say, like, no, you know, um, but as somebody who is there, like, working, you have to remember that, like, um, that some changes take, longer to be, publicly apparent. And like, the my experience in working with District 1 when Trevino was there, and District 5, and with DHS, and all of that, is that, while there has been times where it was like, harm reduction, what is that, don't understand it, that there's been that willingness to learn, and there's always been that willingness. So, like, in all of my conversations with any of them, I've always been like, hey, I'm going to say what I'm going to say to you, and understand that I'm saying it because, we're all trying to, make the lives better, of the people that we serve. And so this is just, an honest, constructive criticism, which is, I mean, it's like, this just a super indigenous thing, right? Like, we have our community circles, and we have accountability processes. And so, but it's been my experience that, like, coming to, and I'm not talking about, like, at the level of the city, of the people making, the laws, or that kind of thing, or, deciding to make the sweeps, because you have to remember that DHS doesn't make that decision. But, you know they are listening and advocating, for these changes. And you can see it, through caseworkers like, Nikita and Daniel, because, they don't, they're very open, about their opinions. They're willing to say what they need to say to their supervisors, for their people. And and their supervisors are willing to listen. And so that will eventually, have effect, especially if, you know organizations and community come in a good way, in a good relative way, and say, hey, this is a process of accountability. This is a process of how we care for our community, and the ways that we're using aren't working. And so, anybody who knows me knows that, like, my big takeaway is going to be what I keep preaching: harm reduction. That we have to have a harm reduction, no barrier, uh, full employment of harm reduction techniques, medical shelter unit. Because things like, honestly, things like ant bites on the street, when you don't have access to proper hygiene, can turn into MRSA. I mean, very absurdly easy. If you have dirty fingernails, you scratch, bam, you can have an issue. Um, so yeah, like, there needs to be, um there has to be that kind of shelter. Because, then when you have, the Alberts, or the Murphys, um, that you're able to have them in a safe place, while a safe supported place, while folks are figuring out how can we get them the help that we need. I always say that if you create resources for the most vulnerable of your community, then everybody in your community will be served. If you make everything accessible, to the most vulnerable in your community, if you make, then everybody will be served. Everybody benefits from it. And you can't say that you are in support of the houseless, if you are not also in support of certain things, like housing rights, like decriminalization and legalization, uh, destigmatization of mental health issues and of drug, misuse, because everybody is using something to cope, in life. And you can't expect people on the street that are living their very worst, days ever to just like, I'm just gonna meditate it out, when you can't meditate it out at home, when you just, a glass of wine in one hand and you joint in the other. Give me a break. So we have to create these spaces for everybody, and this is something that everybody in the community can advocate for. Everybody in community, because this is something that benefits everybody in the community. When you support these things to support your house's community, it benefits the house community too. If you want to think about that, but it's also just the thing that you should do as a relative, as a good relative. It's something we should do. But to just, reaching out to the mayor and to Eric Walsh and to Melody Woosley and to, your council people, to all the council people, and say, hey, look, this is what we want. This is what we need. We need these things. We need not just the harm reduction, no barrier medical shelter units. We also need, houseless hubs that are set up as, safe needle and safe kit distribution sites, and that are set up as safe shooting sites, and that have public restrooms and public bathrooms, and that have constant, access to resources of like, okay, this is a safe place to use. But, when you're ready to kind of talk about that, we also have counseling here. No pressure when you're ready. Oh, by the way, if you need any, connection to any services, you can also talk to this person over here. Again, when you're ready. There's so many people that they're so injured, and we want so badly to help them, but we can't force it on them. If they don't feel safe, if they don't feel secured, if they don't feel like, that they can trust you to help, you deal with their trauma, then you're not going to get anywhere. But if you create these spaces, if you allow for this to happen, then you will have these relationships of trust build and people that want to come to the healing. And it's not like it's anything revolutionary. There's other places around the world, even
Mm-hmm.
around the United States, that have
Mm-hmm.
these kinds of things,
Yeah. I want to bounce off of again Molly again and the comments and kind of what you're describing to me. I think about when Haven for Hope's kind of like ascendance in San Antonio and the psychic landscape of council and staffers and all of this, where it was kind of like the one-stop shop, right? But what it sounds like, what I hear you saying is we need many one-stop shops. We need many multi-layered, kind of like rich community spaces. Is there a shift? Because what Molly seems to be saying is that there's still a culture in council and among city staff where to point fingers, say, "Oh, we got Haven," the one-stop shop. Does that exist still, or are we?
So
Where
a
are
lot
we?
of things changed. A lot of like so last year when the winter storm happened, and mutual aid, like I Yanawana Herbolarios, we were responding as mutual aid, But at that time, we already had a partnership with DHS, so we were also responding with the all of the other houseless groups in the city as part of DHS disaster response. And at that time, it was the very first time that any of the houseless organizations had worked together collectively as a unit to make anything happen. And when we had our debriefing meeting, several of us had made the comment of like, it should, take a disaster for us to work together, collaboratively. And so there's really over the last year, everybody is, within these organizations is trying to work more collaboratively. And one of the things, we had a meeting about it today, is talking about that so many of our resources for the houseless are centered around the the downtown area, and the DHS doesn't own a bunch of buildings that they can just like commandeer and command for them to open as warming center. They have to communicate with the city to of like, well, what are you going to open, who's opening, what centers. Like last time we had the different stations that were open. And so the solution to that, because we can't depend on what is going to get approved or not, and that what gets approved or not also depends on what level of disaster warning is issued, and what things that they get approved, because they have to go up a chain. So the solution is community partnerships. And so like they're working really hard, or at least DHS specifically, to create these community partnerships. And the big thing right now is trying to create relationships with churches and community organizations that are on the outskirts of away from the downtown area, because we have houses all over San Antonio. And there's a lot of times where there's not enough, outreach workers to go out and, bring them into the shelters there. It would be a lot easier for us to go out to where they are and just, take them to a location there. So that's another thing. People that are listening, if you have a community center, if you have, a church, and you're interested in like being an emergency shelter, or interested in being a warming shelter, that's a really big need. I want to remind people that it's really easy for us to put everything off as the responsibility of our government, and I'm all about holding our local government accountable. Ask any of the city council members I've met with. They will tell you I have no problem with telling them that. But I also believe so much in, you know, community sovereignty. And so we have to take some measure of responsibility in terms of, this is a really big city. There's a lot of really big people in it, and there's a lot of things that we can accomplish together. And if we want to make this happen quickly, then we all need to step in. And quite frankly too, if you have different organizations that are like, you know what, I can be an emergency shelter for 5 days during a winter storm, 2 times out of the year, or I can be a warming station or a cooling station, or these kinds of things, and the city is seeing the need, and the city is seeing these things, and all of these people are like reaching out to the city of, hey, there's this need, there's this demand. If you want your voices to be heard, you have to get loud.
Right.
You have to get collectively loud.
And we're stepping to Marisol. You had a kind of almost a concluding question earlier in the broadcast. I feel like Rachel's idling on something too, and if you wanted to kind of offer thoughts on how the culture shift inside of City Hall, perhaps, or also that the question I think what you were asking, Mari, is how does this now inform what has to happen and how people mobilize? So I don't know if you want to restate that, or Rachel, I want to just invite you back in, either one.
Yeah, well, I'll just I don't need to talk a long time, but what I heard from across, our three kind of big takeaways from the situation, I heard harm reduction approach is one of the next, something to organize toward. If community that are watching this broadcast or that have read the series and wondering, what the what do we push for next, right? Coming out of this harm reduction approach. I heard the medical no barrier harm reduction, medical shelters, and then what I had said was just the willingness, the political will of folks within the city, folks on the inside of institutions and agencies, city departments, to collaborate with activists, because there's some things that only folks on the inside can do, right? But there's also some things only folks on the outside can do, and you need us. Folks on the inside need us, uh, to be able to do and say and push in certain ways that maybe you can't, right? And we need the folks on the inside who have that institutional access to pull strings and make things happen. And so those are the three takeaways, sort of organizing goals, would you say, or like the sort of things that we want to do, right, and push for next. That's what I heard.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, yeah, I agree.
But yeah, no, I completely agree. Because honestly, we can't, um, we nobody could do it on their own, and that's like one of the biggest, I guess, things that we need in the future, right? Is organization, right? We have to work together, and then like those that are watching this, right, that want to be involved, you have Yanawana, you can talk to Deceleration News, definitely get involved in the political process, call our office, call all of your council offices, write them, send them letters, go to public comment, demand the city you want to be in, right? And with what was being said earlier, the need for a place like Corazon to exist in our district in D5 is severe, and because many of our folks don't have money to pay for a via bus to go to Corazon,
Yeah.
and so that's also something to fight for, right? Which we will continue to fight for it, and we will continue to work with DHS and work with activists in our community, to make this work better for everybody, especially our most vulnerable. Um, but yeah, I agree with Marisol. Definitely, a focus on harm reduction, a focus on access to these low barrier places, um, and actually building them. Um, and yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, and for sure get
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah, I just maybe a concluding thought from myself in all of this is really about we're talking we haven't got really talked about housing yet, right? In a way, in terms of uh, before Uri, before the storm, for years, groups like I worked with the Sierra Club for some years, and left in September to work on this project with Marisol, kind of focus a little bit more on this. But we've been calling for a kind of a jobs core built around energy efficiency and weatherization of homes, for energy generation, low carbon generation sources like solar and wind, focusing in neighborhoods and communities that are often overlooked and neglected by the movement of those technologies, and put out letters, statements when COVID hit, calling on the mayor, calling on city council to make home weatherization efficiency programs a priority so that people are safe where they are, right? And that's been one of the tensions around the idea for us too, I think, and sometimes the environmental justice movement is this idea of the heating and cooling centers, right? Everybody's home should be a heating and cooling. It should be safe where they're at, and if they choose to be like outside of the home, right, or in non-traditional housing as well, there should be, the right to be safe and secure in their person. And so it'll be interesting to see if how that continues, and if that's picked up and blended into other. I see a finger in the air. But again, like, so I watch, like, going forward, groups like the Sierra Club, they've been doing a lot around, fix the grid. But the question of, that's fine, but we also need a mass weatherization and efficiency programs, targeting those who are most exposed to the elements, who are, getting warmer. They were warmer outside their homes than they were inside their homes, and in some of these cases, if they could have a fire in the backyard. So just it occurs to me that something that we hadn't touched on yet, and we're just past 8. It's 8:40, so I know we're wrapping up.
On top line, I just want to say we were calling for that back in 2009.
Oh yeah, it is.
And I got some stimulus money that kind of did it. I mean, but the big challenge was at that time, and still, it's the perpetual demand. Like, to do a program like that right, you need to partner with organizers. You need to partner with people in the neighborhoods who know the people. Like.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you, everybody. And we'll continue to follow up on this and related issues, and look forward to seeing y'all in the community and in chambers and wherever that is. I haven't been to chambers in a long time. I'm doing this COVID pretty seriously because of the little one. But thank you, everybody. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Right. Bye.
All right. Bye.
And again, thank you, Maria. Thank you, Rachel, Marisol. And we're going to just do a little outro with our musics. We should mention again, George Garza Jr., a lot of respect and gratitude for your work. And he constructed, he's illustrating, he's doing the audio illustration for Deceleration. You can check our last video. We had a short conversation with George about this music and the significance of it. Again, thank you for all of our supporters, those who are, committed $5 a month or whatever it is through Patreon. That really helps, keeps us moving forward. And thank you. Hey, I see Meredith in the comments. Good to see you. And we'll try to do some more of this. It's fun. It's stressful and weird for us on this side of the camera, but it's fun, and I just love being with our people. So have a good night, everyone. And for those playing it back later, deceleration.news. Do